As part of your MMIs, you're going to have to be pretty comfortable around ethics, and ethics is a massive topic. There are like 5, 6, 7, 8 different things that could come up in this station, and so in this video we're going to do something slightly different. I'm going to go through a mock station on a particular ethics topic, breaking bad news. I'm going to give you 4 questions at which I want you to pause after each question, come up with an answer, and then deliver the answer as if you were in the interview. Play the video and we'll talk through that question and I'll give you a mock answer at the end. Hopefully this should be some really good practice for you, and also you can use this video in your revision to come back to later. If that sounds like a good idea to you, let's get straight into the video. Alright, so if you don't know who I am, I'm Akshi. I'm a 4th year med student at Imperial, and like I said, we're going to do some of these videos this year because I've not done anything quite like them, and hopefully they give you some more chances to practice. So let's start with the question. This is a breaking bad news station. So your scenario is, you are a medical professional who needs to deliver the news to a patient, Mrs. Johnson, that her recent biopsy results have shown cancer. She's worried and suspecting something was wrong, and she's visibly anxious and worried. The first question is, how would you begin the conversation with Mr. Johnson, and what would you say to create a supportive and empathetic environment? So feel free to pause the video now, come up with your answer, give yourself maybe a couple of minutes, deliver the answer, and then play the video. Alright, so let's talk about the question. So this question is really quite a basic, it just gets you into the station, and it's just asking you how you'd set up that environment. So when you're delivering bad news to a patient, you need to remember that the patient is going to be nervous, they'll be worried, maybe angry even, so you need to create an environment that's calm and relaxed. That means away from people, things like bright lights, loud noises, ideally in a room, maybe your surgery or your office, closed door, no one else in it unless they've requested for family to be in the room with them. But aside from that, just a quiet room with just you and the patient, reasonable light settings on. The key thing here is making sure the patient feels happy and comfortable in their space. So that's the most important thing. Now you also want to make sure you open up by introducing yourself, making sure the patient knows why they're there and what they're going to receive today. You'll probably want to ask them whether they know all of this beforehand, so you just get a gauge of how filled in they are about the particular scenario. These are all things that you should just be saying very quickly and laying everything out before you get into the brunt of the answer. So let's give you a mock answer. And that's something along the lines of what I'd say. Now that is not a perfect answer by any means, there are plenty of things you can add or take away there, but that just gives you an idea of what I would say. And I think that's a good answer because it covers some of your thinking and it allows you to talk through your thinking first before you're telling the examiner what you'd actually say in the situation. So that's what we do. Okay, let's move on to question 2 now. As the conversation progresses, Mrs. Johnson becomes emotional and asks about her treatment options. How would you provide information about treatment while maintaining sensitivity to her emotion? And go ahead and pause the video before we start talking about it. Alright, so this is quite a tricky question. Now you need to sort of answer this in 2 phases. First of all, you want to deal with the patient's emotions. So you want to give across to the examiner the idea that you're going to validate the patient's emotions. Tell them that it's perfectly normal to feel like this and their emotions are well within their right. You then move on by saying you're going to explain the treatment to the patient and you're going to give them a very brief overview of each treatment before you ask them for their opinions, their ideas, their questions, and sometimes just giving them the space to think without saying anything. Silence is always a really good thing to use in these situations when you're breaking bad news, giving the patient the freedom to think without interruption, and that's what I'd say. Let's go through a mock answer now. Now again, that's a perfectly good answer. It's concise, it covers the 2 phases of the answer that we spoke about, but you can add anything to this that you'd like. But I think that's quite a good answer, covering it in about half a minute, 45 seconds, and going through exactly your thinking and what you'd say. Now you'll notice a theme across these answers. You've always got to first start about how you'd go through this in your head, so never think in silence, think out loud, and then tell the examiner what you would say in the situation. Right, let's move on to question 3. So question 3, Mrs. Johnson becomes violent and angry during the conversation. How would you manage the situation and address her concerns about sharing this news with her loved ones? So this is a packed question, and actually there are 2 themes running through this. Number 1, de-escalating a high-tense situation, and number 2, talking about telling the family. So the first part of this answer, you want to tell the examiner that you're not going to be criticizing the patient for getting angry, and telling them that you understand this is a normal reaction to being given bad news. Let the patient have their rant or shout or whatever, and then you politely but quietly remind them that that's a perfectly normal reaction to have and you understand, or you can appreciate where they're coming from. If they get violent, you would remove yourself from the situation at a safe distance because your own well-being is really important. They are in a hospital or doctor's office, and perhaps it may be better to come back at a later time once they process their emotions, something like that. Then you'd go through telling them how you would advise them to talk to their family. So you'd tell them that it's up to them. Sometimes it's better to have the family support, so telling them might be a good idea, but at the same time, if they'd like to keep this confidential, that is up to them. You'd recommend that this is their own decision and that they take this into consideration, but at the end of the day, it's up to them what they want to do. So let's go through a mock answer. And that answer just breaks things down completely and allows you to approach this far more easily. You can digest the information bit by bit. First, talk about de-escalating the intensity of the situation with the anger, and secondly, exploring options whether Mrs. Johnson wants to speak to her family. So that's a good answer, I think, and you can sort of riff off that. So, the fourth and final question. Mrs. Johnson's family wants to know the outcome of her medical tests without her agreement. How would you address the situation while respecting patient confidentiality and maintaining open communication with both Mrs. Johnson and her family? So, tricky question, I get that. Confidentiality is always a really grey area in medicine, and you should know some basics. One of the biggest basics is that you essentially cannot reveal information about a patient's treatment without their consent. Now, there are obviously some fine lines and exceptions to this in terms of whether the patient is expressing harm to others, or whether this news affects other people, whether it's a notifiable disease, etc. But for your level of knowledge, you just need to know that you can't give a patient's information or diagnosis to any other people, even if it's their wife or children, without their consent. So in this answer, you want to break this understanding down to the examiner. You need to tell them that you know this and you would express this to their family politely again. You wouldn't shut them down, but they might want to speak to the patient themselves if they have any concerns directly. So let's talk about a mock answer. Okay, and that's everything. So hopefully this video gave you a bit more information about breaking bad news. Hopefully you got a little bit more out of it. At the end of the day, breaking bad news is a really difficult thing to do, and ethics stations unfortunately love to test you on this. So if you've got any questions about it, let me know in the comments down below, or DM me on Instagram. A reminder, timestamps are down below for all the questions if you want to go back and see any of them. Aside from that, I will see you all in the next video.